Imagine, if you will, a threshold. It is not a gate of ornate iron, nor is it a marble archway inscribed with the ancient warnings of poets or kings. It is a doorway, strikingly ordinary, weathered by the mundane friction of daily existence. It stands in the middle of a vast, featureless plain. You are standing before it. Your hand, that singular instrument of your will, is hovering mere inches from the frame, the wood cool and solid beneath your fingertips. But look closer. Notice the space beyond the frame. It is not empty, though the uninitiated eye might perceive it as such. Beyond that threshold lies a life so precisely aligned with the truest, most secret contours of your being, so saturated with the specific texture of the existence you have quietly, perhaps even desperately, whispered to yourself in the dark, that to gaze upon it directly is almost painful. It is too real. It hums with a frequency that your current senses are only just beginning to calibrate. You are not arriving at this threshold. You have been here for a lifetime, unknowingly pressing your palm against the barrier of your own making. You may find it impossible to conceive that a sequence of observations, a rhythmic movement of ideas through the corridors of your mind at this very moment, could represent a transition as monumental as the one you are currently inhabiting. Yet, the paradox remains. You are not seeking the door. You are the door. You are the architect, the threshold, and the one who must finally decide to walk through. The atmosphere is thick with the electricity of potential, a stillness that precedes a storm, or perhaps the dawning of a new sun. To grasp the mechanics of this threshold, one must first dismantle the scaffolding of the conventional worldview. We are taught from the earliest stages of our cognitive development that reality is an external, objective monolith, a grand, indifferent machine that operates according to laws of luck, resources, and superior alignment of circumstances. We view ourselves as small, reactive nodes moving through this machine, hoping to catch a favorable wind or avoid the crushing weight of misfortune. But let us apply the method of recursive thinking. Why is this conventional view so pervasive? Because it is the path of least resistance for the ego. It is infinitely more comfortable to be a victim of a cold, vast world than to be the sole author of a reality that is currently reflecting your own deepest insecurities and limitations. How, then, does the shift occur? It begins with the radical, uncompromising admission that the outer world, your relationships, your bank account, the very texture of your daily routine, is not an independent entity. It is a mirror. Consider the mirror on your wall. It does not possess a moral compass. It does not choose to flatter you or to emphasize your flaws. It is an instrument of absolute, cold, and beautiful fidelity. If you stand before it with a scowl, it offers you a scowl. If you approach it with terror, it reflects a face of terror. It cannot offer you a smile if you do not first offer one to the glass. The outer world functions on an identical principle, though the delay in reflection is often longer and the complexity of the image is infinitely more profound. Your circumstances are the literal objectification of your inner state. When we ask, why do the same patterns repeat in my life? The answer is found not in the world, but in the internal repository of your assumptions. Your subconscious mind is a projector, and the world is the screen. If the movie playing on the screen is one of scarcity, of betrayal, or of stagnation, it is futile to attempt to change the projection by rearranging the people in the room. You must move to the booth. You must change the film. This is not a metaphor. It is the fundamental physics of consciousness. The invisible, the state of your deep, settled assumption, always precedes the visible. When you change the inner state at the level of core belief, the reflection must change. It is a law of nature as immutable as gravity. It cannot do otherwise. In the twilight of the 17th century, in a city whose name has been erased by the sands of time, there lived a painter named Elias. Elias was obsessed not with the brush, but with the ground, the texture of the canvas upon which he worked. He believed that the canvas itself possessed a memory, a stubborn refusal to accept a new image if the ghost of the previous one remained beneath the gesso. One autumn, The city's duke commissioned Elias to paint a masterpiece that would represent the prosperity and eternal joy of the realm. For months, Elias struggled. He painted vibrant scenes of golden harvests and laughing children. Yet within days, the paint would peel, or the colors would darken into shades of melancholy gray. The duke was furious, demanding to know why the art refused to hold its form. Elias retreated to his studio, refusing food or light, and contemplated his failure. He realized he had been painting over the old, dark scenes of famine and war that had previously occupied the canvas. He had been trying to impose a new reality upon a foundation of ancient trauma. He took a sharp blade and began to scrape. He scraped until his knuckles bled, removing every trace of the old images, exposing the raw, clean, waiting fabric of the canvas. He sat before the blank, terrifying white space for 3 days, entering into a state of profound silence. He did not think of paint. He did not think of the Duke's gold. He inhabited, with every fiber of his being, the feeling of a realm already at peace, the smell of the harvest, the resonance of laughter, the stillness of security. He lived in the painting before he touched a brush to it. When he finally began to paint, he did not work with the desperation of a man trying to fix a broken image. He worked with the steady, rhythmic ease of a man who was merely transcribing a reality that was already there. When the Duke returned, he did not see paint on canvas. He saw a window. The people of the city would walk past the painting and find themselves suddenly, inexplicably, overcome by a sense of profound well-being. Elias had mastered the law. By aligning his inner state with the end result, the world, even in the form of a simple canvas, had no choice but to conform. You now stand at the threshold of this same realization. You have lived your life as an observer, believing that the world happens to you. You are now being invited to understand that life happens from you. This is the moment where the comfort of being a victim is stripped away, and in its place is given the terrifying, exhilarating scepter of sovereignty. To begin this transition, you must perform a simple yet daunting task. Observe your own reactions throughout the coming day. Notice the moments where you feel like an effect of your circumstances. When the traffic is heavy, when a colleague speaks with sharp intent, when your finances feel tight, do not react. Stop, breathe. Recognize that these are simply the reflections of an inner state you have been broadcasting. In that moment of recognition, you have stepped out of the role of the victim and into the role of the creator. Before you go, there is a pulse of energy you must cultivate. If this narrative of truth resonates, if you feel the shift beginning to take hold in the bedrock of your soul, I invite you to like this transmission. It is not merely a gesture of appreciation, it is an act of declaration, a signal to your own subconscious that you are ready to stop cleaning the mirror and start changing the person standing before it. You are closer than you know. The door is already ajar, and the light spilling out from the other side is the light of your own untapped potential. In our next chapter, we will leave the threshold entirely and step into the forge. We will explore how to architect the invisible foundations of your future, ensuring that when you do walk through, you are not merely visiting a new reality, you are claiming your throne within it. The threshold is here. Your hand is on the frame. Are you ready to see what remains when you finally stop believing in the illusion? Subscribe now, for the path beyond this point requires a steady heart and a clear eye. The transformation has begun. Picture a desert at twilight, a landscape of absolute stillness where the sky bleeds from deep violet into an impenetrable, star-dusted charcoal. There stands a structure, or what remains of one. It is a monument of vanity, a soaring spire of white marble and gold leaf, constructed by a long-forgotten dynasty. Yet, as the wind whistles through its hollowed chambers, it groans. The foundation, laid upon shifting, uncompacted sand, has succumbed to the relentless patience of the earth. The spire tilts, its grand architecture failing not because of a lack of ambition, but because of a failure to respect the unseen weight beneath the surface. Now, shift your gaze a few miles away. In the heart of that same unforgiving desert, a single, tiny seed lies beneath the scorched earth. It is invisible to the eye, unadorned, and silent. Yet, Within that microscopic husk lies the entire geometric blueprint of an acacia tree. It contains the logic of its roots, the reach of its branches, the exact shade of its blossoms, and the resilience required to thrive in a furnace. Therein lies the paradox that defines your existence. The monument of your life, the accolades, the relationships, the successes are but the visible spire. If you have spent your years pouring effort into the spire while ignoring the stone beneath, you will find your life tilting, unstable, and prone to collapse. But the seed? The seed is the invisible principle. It is the architecture of the future, encoded in silence. You have been looking for the source of your life in the stone and mortar of the world, unaware that the only true construction occurs in the darkness of the invisible. To master the architecture of the invisible, one must first confront a disquieting truth. Everything you perceive as solid is in fact a consequence. If we apply the rigor of recursive thinking, we must ask, why does the external world appear to be the primary reality? It appears so because our five senses are designed for biological survival, optimized to process matter, distance, and time. They are, by definition, reactive instruments. But how do we transcend this reactivity? We must descend into the how of existence. Reality is not a collection of objects. It is a manifestation of frequency. Your consciousness is the fundamental substrate upon which the physical world is sketched. When you hold an inner state, a settled, unwavering assumption, you are not merely thinking, you are calibrating the lens through which the universe arranges itself. Why does the invisible precede the visible? Because the causal chain of the universe moves from the subjective to the objective. A bridge is not built because the steel decides to form a span. It is built because a human mind inhabited the subjective state of the bridge as a completed fact. The architect experienced the bridge in the invisible realm long before a single beam was placed. If the architect had harbored a foundational doubt, a secret, lingering assumption of failure, the steel would never have been ordered. Or if it had, it would have been forged with the flaws of that doubt. How does one navigate this? By realizing that you are the primary architect of your internal landscape. Most individuals operate as maintenance workers of their external circumstances, constantly patching the cracks in their lives, unaware that the cracks are originating from the blueprints they are unconsciously drawing in their minds. To change the spire, you must stop tending to the stone and start re-engineering the silence. You must understand that your deepest, most unexpressed assumptions, those quiet beliefs you carry into sleep and wake with, are the gravity that pulls your external life into its current, repeating configuration. You are building from the invisible out. Never, not for a single moment, is it the other way around. In the mid-18th century, within the cobblestone silence of Bern, there lived a clockmaker named Johannes. He was known not for the intricate gold filigree of his timepieces, but for a singular, haunting ability. His clocks never lost a second. While the greatest masters of Europe struggled with the erratic influence of temperature and friction, Johannes's clocks moved with the terrifying precision of the stars themselves. Travelers came from across the continent to purchase his work, often asking, "What secret alloy do you use for your gears? What hidden balance do you employ to defy the chaos of the world?" Johannes would merely smile and point to his workbench, which was often entirely empty. He would explain that he spent his days not in the assembly of gears, but in the observation of time itself. He claimed that he did not build the clocks, he allowed them to exist. One winter, a rival guild, driven by envy, broke into his shop to steal his secrets. They dismantled his finished clocks, melted down the metals, and measured the teeth of every gear with calipers. They spent months attempting to replicate the mechanisms, but their clocks were ordinary, flawed, and prone to the same earthly decay as any other. They returned to the shop, furious, demanding to know where he hid the master mechanism. Johannes stood in the center of his shop and whispered, "You were looking for the gears, I was looking for the pulse." He explained that before he ever cut a piece of brass, he would sit in the dark of his shop for weeks, until the rhythm of the perfect clock was so vivid in his mind, so physically real, that he could hear its ticking in the marrow of his bones. He was not making a clock. He was tuning his consciousness to the state of absolute precision. The gears were merely the inevitable expression of that inner state. When his consciousness became the clock, the brass had no alternative but to follow. The guild members had sought to build the invisible by manipulating the visible. Johannes had simply inhabited the invisible, and the visible had obeyed. The lesson is stark. You have been trying to adjust the gears of your life, hoping that if you polish the brass and tighten the springs, the rhythm of your world will suddenly harmonize. You are wasting your labor. The gears of your life, your finances, your health, your professional influence are not the source of your reality. They are the secondary, downstream effects of your internal pulse. To embody this today, you must practice the architecture of silence. Find a moment of absolute stillness. Stop evaluating your progress. Stop checking your outer circumstances for evidence of change. Instead, identify the one area of your life where you feel the most friction. Now, do not think about the solution in terms of action. Think about it in terms of state. If that issue were resolved, how would you move? How would you breathe? What would the rhythm of your inner world feel like if that success were already the background noise of your existence? Do not ask, how can I fix this? Ask, who would I be if this were already a settled, ordinary fact? When you can hold that state, that specific, quiet, and unshakable pulse, you have begun to lay your foundation. You are no longer building on sand. You are building in the bedrock of the unseen. You have made the first transition from the material to the master. But now a deeper mystery beckons. We have established that the invisible creates the visible, but what happens when the mirror of your world begins to push back? What happens when the reflection seems to stubbornly defy your new architectural design? The answer lies in the mirror of neutrality, a concept that will test whether you have truly mastered the law or if you are still held captive by the ghosts of your past. The door to chapter 3 is opening, and within it, you will learn why the world is far more responsive than you ever dared to imagine. Proceed with the courage of an architect who knows that the structure is already complete in the halls of the mind. Imagine a vast, dimly lit hall, the floor polished to such an exacting sheen that the boundary between the wood beneath your feet and the reflection of the ceiling above vanishes into a singular, dizzying abyss. You stand in the center of this hall, and all around you, arranged in a perfect, endless circle, are mirrors of ancient, silvered glass. These are not mere reflections, they are portals. You raise your hand to adjust your collar, and 100 reflections follow suit. You frown, and 100 faces scowl back with terrifying, rhythmic precision. You try to trick the mirror, you offer it a wide, hopeful grin, while your heart is heavy with the leaden weight of past failures. You wait for the reflection to offer you a different vision, to soften the edges of your sorrow, or to hint at the joy you are pretending to feel. But the mirrors remain stoic, cold, and utterly, ruthlessly accurate. The paradox is this: you stand in the hall of your life, screaming at the glass to show you a different version of yourself, demanding that the reflection change before you do. You are caught in a cycle of pleading with a ghost. The silence in the hall is heavy, a vacuum that swallows your desperation. You begin to realize that the mirrors are not judging you. They are not cruel, nor are they kind. They are simply the objective arbiters of what stands before them. They do not editorialize. They do not offer mercy. They simply exist to confirm the truth of your own presence. To understand the nature of this mirror, we must engage in the practice of recursive thinking. Why is it that the human consciousness so fiercely resists the realization that the world is a reflection? The answer lies in the ego's profound attachment to its own narrative of justification. To accept that the outer world is a mirror is to accept that there is no out there to blame. It is to forfeit the sanctuary of the victim. How does this mirror actually function? It operates through the law of correspondence. The world you inhabit is not a collection of independent variables. It is a resonant field. Every belief you harbor, every assumption you have woven into the tapestry of your identity, functions as a tuning fork. When you strike that fork, the world, the mirror, is forced to vibrate in sympathy with that specific frequency. Why do patterns repeat in your life with such agonizing persistence? It is because you are consistently standing before the mirror with the same frequency of thought. If you believe, at the deep, subterranean level of your being, that you are destined for struggle, the mirror will find a way to manifest struggle. It is not punishing you, it is fulfilling your decree. The mirror is a vacuum of agency. It waits for your input to fill its space. How then do we break the loop? We must understand that the emotional weather you inhabit most reliably is the primary data feed for the mirror. If you attempt to override your state with mere positive thinking, a surface-level performance, the mirror will detect the dissonance. It sees through the performance of the smile to the underlying current of the fear. The mirror is an expert in the difference between a costume and the skin beneath it. To change the reflection, you must change the observer. You must move from the state of seeking to the state of having. You must not change what you do, you must change what you are. The reflection cannot fail to follow, for that is the absolute, impersonal law of its existence. Consider two travelers, Julian and Silas, who both embarked upon the same arduous mountain pass in the ancient world. The pass was notorious for its unpredictable weather, its treacherous rockfalls, and the isolation that often unnerved the stoutest of hearts. Julian approached the mountain with a heart full of trepidation. He had heard the legends of the past tales of bandits, of freezing winds that would strip the warmth from a man's bones, and of a landscape that hated the intruder. As he walked, his eyes were constantly darting to the shadows. He interpreted every shifting cloud as an omen of a storm, every rustle of the brush as the approach of a predator. By the time he reached the midpoint of the journey, his fear had manifested in his physical reality. He stumbled on rocks he could have easily avoided because he was too focused on the possibility of falling. He missed the hidden springs of fresh water because he was too busy scanning for the threat of drought. The mountain became the adversary he had assumed it would be. Silas, however, possessed a different internal frequency. He had spent his life cultivating the assumption that the world was inherently supportive, a landscape of opportunity designed for his success. As he climbed, he did not ignore the risks, but he viewed the mountain as a teacher. When the winds picked up, he saw them as a test of his strength, an invitation to grow. When he encountered a steep ascent, he saw it not as a barrier, but as a path to a more breathtaking vantage point. In the end, Julian survived, but he emerged broken, his journey a catalogue of horrors. Silas thrived, arriving at the summit with a sense of expansion and renewed purpose. The mountain had not changed. The pass remained the same geography for both men. The mountain simply acted as a mirror, reflecting the quality of the consciousness that walked upon it. Julian's mountain was a prison, Silas's mountain was a cathedral. The mirror did not care which man was right, it only cared which state of being was present. You have spent too long in the hall of mirrors, shouting at your reflections, trying to rearrange the images while ignoring the source. The truth is simple. Though it requires a courage that is rare, you are the only variable in the equation of your life. To embody this today, begin the practice of neutral observation. For the next 24 hours, treat every interaction, every setback, and every victory as a piece of feedback from the mirror. When someone treats you with disregard, do not ask, "Why are they doing this to me?" Instead, ask, "What inner state of mine is calling for this reflection?" Do not judge the mirror. Do not get angry at it. Simply observe it as a scientist, observing a reading on a dial. If you do not like the reading, do not smash the dial. Change the internal temperature. By taking responsibility for the reflection, you are reclaiming your power. You are no longer a puppet of your circumstances. You are the one who pulls the strings. But wait, if the mirror is so responsive, why does it sometimes seem to hesitate? Why, when you decide to change, does the old world linger like a ghost in the corners of your vision? There is a secret to the lag time, the delay between the shift in your consciousness and the reorganization of your physical reality. In our next chapter, we will enter the workshop of imagination, where we will learn how to handle this interval, how to sharpen the image, until the world has no choice but to drop the mask of the past and finally bow to your new creation. Your hand is on the frame, and the mirror is waiting. Like this video if you are ready to stop blaming the reflection and start commanding the source. The bridge is shortening, the distance is dissolving, and we are moving closer to the heart of the mechanism. Prepare yourself. The next stage of our journey will demand that you master not just your thoughts, but the very texture of your perceived reality. We move forward now into the quiet, creative forge of the future. Picture a grand, vaulted chamber at the center of your own consciousness. It is illuminated not by the harsh glare of the sun, but by a soft amber glow that emanates from within the walls themselves. This is the inner sanctum, the workshop of imagination. Before you stands a workbench of polished obsidian, and upon it lie no physical tools, no hammers, no chisels, no blueprints made of paper. Instead, there is only a shimmering, malleable substance that pulses with the heartbeat of your own attention. Outside these walls, the world screams for your notice. It demands you look at the flickering images on the screens of your life, the dwindling bank account, the silence from a loved one, the stagnancy of a career. The world insists that these are the real things, the concrete facts of your existence. But here, in the workshop, you recognize the great paradox. The world outside is merely the shadow play of a performance that has already concluded. When you close your eyes and enter this chamber, you are not retreating from reality. You are, for the first time, stepping into the source code of existence. You see a scene of the life you desire, not as a distant, hopeful picture, but as a tangible, living reality. You reach out and you touch the velvet of a chair that does not yet exist in the outer world. You hear the hum of a conversation that has yet to be spoken. The air in this room is thick with the scent of ozone and possibility. To remain in the outer world is to chase the shadow. To inhabit this workshop is to command the object casting it. Which, you must ask, is the more potent reality? To grasp the power of the imagination, one must discard the common, trivial definition of the word. We are conditioned to treat imagination as a flight of fancy, a pleasant but ineffectual distraction, the domain of children and dreamers. We must apply the method of recursive thinking to unmask this lie. Why has society marginalized the imagination? Because a populace that believes its destiny is determined by external material forces is a populace that is easily managed. If the imagination is merely daydreaming, then your internal world is irrelevant. But how does the imagination actually function as a creative instrument? It operates through the principle of identity transference. When you enter into a scene in your mind with total sensory commitment, you are not observing an image, you are occupying a state of being. The brain, in its profound evolutionary efficiency, often fails to distinguish between a vivid, sensory-loaded mental act and an external physical experience. Why is this the key to manifestation? Because reality is not constructed of matter, but of conscious engagement. When you inhabit a scene in your imagination, you are broadcasting a frequency that the universe, that faithful, non-editorializing mirror, cannot ignore. The universe does not ask, is this person currently in possession of this object? It asks, what is the state of the consciousness standing before me? How, then, do we move from seeing a picture to inhabiting a reality? The answer is sensory density, a hollow thought. A mere wish lacks the weight to displace current circumstances. A thought that is filled with the sensory texture of the already accomplished becomes an objective fact in the only dimension where creation first occurs, the mental. You are not visualizing to make something happen. You are entering a space where the thing has already happened, so that the outer world, forced by the law of congruence, must eventually realign to match the reality you have established within. You are the architect, and the imagination is your drafting table. The blueprints you draw there are not suggestions to the universe, they are commands. In the High Renaissance, there lived a sculptor of incomparable renown named Valerius. While his peers spent years traveling to the quarries of Carrara, debating the quality of the stone and the tools required to hew it, Valerius was rarely seen. He spent months confined within his private studio, which was often entirely devoid of marble. A young apprentice, bewildered by the master's absence from the quarry, asked him, "Master, how can you promise the Duke a statue of such grace when you have not even begun to carve the block?" Valerius led the boy into the dark studio. He did not point to a piece of stone. He pointed to the empty air in the center of the room. "The statue is already here," Valerius whispered. "It is not in the stone. The stone is merely the obstacle that hides it." Valerius then described, with agonizing, beautiful detail, the curve of the figure's shoulder, the tension in the marble calf, and the sorrow in the eyes. He spoke for hours, and as he spoke, he moved his hands through the air as if he were smoothing the cold, hard surface of the figure. He did this every day for 3 months. He was not imagining the statue. He was living in the presence of the completed work. He felt the cold touch of the stone. He smelled the dust of the chisel. He experienced the weight of the finished monument. When the block of marble finally arrived at his studio, Valerius did not toil for years. He worked with a swift, terrifying, and unerring precision. He did not create the statue. He simply chipped away the excess stone to reveal the masterpiece that had already been brought into existence in his workshop. The bystanders whispered that it was magic, but Valerius knew the truth. He had already sculpted the invisible reality. The stone had no choice but to yield. You have viewed your desires as distant mountains, separated from you by the treacherous valley of some day. You are now learning that the mountain is not in the distance, it is within you. The workshop is open. The obsidian bench is ready. To embody this truth today, you must perform the session of sensory inhabitation. Choose one desire, not a vague hope, but a specific, singular result. Sit in the silence. Do not look at the picture of your desire. Enter into the feeling of its accomplishment. Do not imagine the moment you receive it. That is the drama of arrival, and it keeps the result in the future. Instead, imagine a scene that implies the goal is already old, common, and ordinary. If you desire a new home, do not imagine the day you buy it. Imagine the comfort of sitting in your favorite chair, the smell of the room, the specific, boring, wonderful routine of living there. Make it sensory, make it heavy, make it real, and when you open your eyes, carry the weight of that reality with you. Do not check the outer world for evidence. You are a creator, not a monitor. But take heed, there is a shadow that stalks the creator. It is the shadow of the lag, the agonizing silence that follows your first planting of the seed. It is the moment when the outer world seems to grow even more stubborn, as if to test the sincerity of your inner conviction. In the next chapter, we will discuss the feeling of fulfillment, the psychological state that acts as the final lockpick for the door to your desires. We will learn how to endure the silence, how to cultivate a peace that surpasses the evidence of the senses, and how to hold your inner state until the outer world is forced to surrender. You are the master of the workshop. Your hand is on the frame. Subscribe to this journey, for we are moving toward the final realization of your power. The architecture is set, the mirror is clear, and the workshop is humming with your influence. The next step is the most critical. It is where the invisible finally solidifies. See you in the threshold of the next transition. Imagine a man standing in the center of a parched, cracked earth, holding a hollow chalice to the sky. He has been told that if he cries out loud enough, if he pleads with enough agony, or if he performs the right rituals, the heavens will pour forth the waters of abundance. He stands there for years, his throat parched, his eyes fixed on a cloudless, mocking blue expanse. He is doing everything correctly. He is performing the act of the supplicant. He is visualizing the rain. He is focusing on the water with every ounce of his being. Yet he remains thirsty. The paradox is cruel and absolute. His intense desire for water is the very thing that proves to the deep, silent intelligence of the universe that he is currently a man who lacks water. Every prayer, every desperate plea, every frantic visualization is in fact a loud, undeniable broadcast of his current state, thirst. He is trying to attract the water while broadcasting the frequency of the desert. He is looking for the rain, but he is living in the drought. He is failing, not because he lacks faith, but because he is practicing the wrong state. He is trying to create from a place of wanting, a state that by its very definition necessitates that the object of desire is absent. What would happen if he simply lowered the cup, closed his eyes, and felt the coolness of the water on his tongue, the phantom sensation of a thirst already quenched? The sky cannot change until the man inside the man changes. To grasp the mechanics of manifestation, we must shatter the most common delusion in the architecture of change, the confusion between image and feeling. Why do so many individuals diligently practice visualization, follow the manuals of positive thinking, and yet find themselves standing in the same parched landscape of their past? It is because they are decorating their emptiness with images, while remaining internally anchored in the reality of their lack. Let us apply recursive thinking. Why is feeling the ultimate currency of creation? Because the subconscious mind, the architect of your reality, is entirely indifferent to the pictures you show it. It is, however, incapable of ignoring the felt reality of your state. The subconscious does not understand I want, I need, or I hope. It understands only I am. When you visualize your desire while feeling the anxiety of its absence, you are creating a mental dissonance. You are telling your subconscious, I am the person who does not have this thing. How does this work? Consider that feeling is the saturating agent. An image is like a dry sketch on a page. Feeling is the ink that gives it weight, dimension, and life. If you imagine wealth while feeling the constriction of poverty in your chest, you are manifesting the constriction. The universe does not produce what you think. It produces what you are. If your inner weather is dominated by the storm of desperation, no amount of sunshine in your mental images can force the sky to clear. How do we achieve the feeling of fulfillment? You must master the art of the assume. You must cultivate the settled, calm, and slightly boring certainty of someone for whom the desire is already an ancient, established fact. It is not the thrill of the wind that manifests. It is the naturalness of the already. The more you can strip the drama away and replace it with the steady, quiet conviction of presence, the more quickly the outer world will be forced to rearrange itself. You are not trying to bridge the gap between now and then. You are collapsing the gap by realizing there is no then. There is only the feeling of now, and when that feeling is aligned with your desire, the result is not a possibility, it is a physical certainty. In the bustling port of Tyre, there lived a merchant named Hamilcar who was famous throughout the Mediterranean for his uncanny ability to forecast the arrival of ships. While other merchants stood on the docks, squinting at the horizon and wringing their hands in anticipation of their cargo, Hamilcar would sit in his warehouse, sipping wine and discussing philosophy with his guests, as if his ships had already docked and their goods were already sold. One year, a great storm ravaged the seas. The other merchants lost their minds, running to the temples, sacrificing bulls, and shouting into the wind, consumed by the terror of bankruptcy. Hamilcar continued his daily routines with the calm of a man who had already banked his profits. A younger rival, driven to madness by Hamilcar's serenity, confronted him. "How can you be so calm?" the rival screamed. "Your ships are out there, vulnerable to the waves. Do you not see the chaos? Do you not feel the threat of ruin?" Hamilcar looked at the young man with a profound, gentle pity. "You are looking at the sea," Hamilcar said. "I am looking at my warehouse." Hamilcar explained that he had spent his time not in the monitoring of the ships, but in the internal experience of the result. He had lived the feeling of the ships docked safely, the smell of the spices being unloaded, the feel of the gold coins in his ledger. He had anchored his consciousness in the warehouse of the end. When the storm hit, his rival was broadcasting the frequency of the storm. Hamilcar was broadcasting the frequency of the harbor. 2 weeks later, the storm cleared. Hamilcar's ship sailed into the port, unscathed. The other merchants' ships were nowhere to be found. Hamilcar did not predict the future. He established the feeling of the result and the reality of the sea. A fickle, chaotic, and often violent mirror was forced to align with the unshakable state of the man who had already experienced the reward. You have been acting like the young merchant, staring at the storm, vibrating with the fear of loss, and wondering why your ship never arrives. You are trying to use visualization as a tool to force the future to change, when in fact, you are only reinforcing the reality of the present struggle. To embody this today, you must perform the practice of the already. Choose the one desire that has eluded you. Now, stop visualizing the process of getting it. Stop imagining the moment of your triumph. Instead, move your consciousness into the ordinary time that comes after the goal has been achieved. If you want a promotion, do not imagine the interview. Imagine the feeling of sitting at your new desk on a Tuesday morning, the feeling of the work being routine, the feeling of the colleagues already knowing you are in that role. Feel the boredom of it. Feel the normalcy of it. When your desire feels old, when it feels like a fact so established that you don't need to get excited about it, you have hit the mark. You have successfully planted the seed in the soil of fulfillment. But a question remains. What of the physical actions you must take? If you are living in the already, does that mean you cease to work? Does it mean you stop taking steps in the physical world? The answer is both simple and profound. You will take action, but the character of your action will be transformed. You will no longer be making your way. You will be creating your expression. In our next chapter, we will explore the mechanics of inspired action. We will learn how to move through the world with the confidence of one who has already arrived, and why the action of a creator is fundamentally different from the frantic, desperate scramble of the seeker. The threshold of this new existence is firm beneath your feet. Like this transmission, if you are ready to stop begging the heavens and start living from the end, the lag is fading, the mirror is adjusting, and you are becoming the person who already possesses the very thing you once thought was lost. We move forward now into the stride of the already fulfilled. Picture a vast, sun-drenched courtyard where two men are engaged in the labor of cutting stone. The first man, laboring under the heavy midday heat, strikes his chisel with a rhythmic, desperate ferocity. His brow is furrowed, his breath ragged, and his eyes are constantly darting toward the pile of unworked stone before him. To this man, every strike of the hammer is a battle. He is fighting the material, fighting the time, and fighting the very gravity that opposes his ambition. He moves with the frantic, jagged energy of a man who believes that if he does not suffer enough, if he does not bleed enough for the work, the statue will never emerge. He is running, in his mind, toward a finish line that remains cruelly beyond his reach. The second man works in the shade of a nearby olive tree. His movements are fluid, almost lazy in their economy. He strikes the stone with precision, yet there is no strain in his posture. He does not fight the marble. He seems to be in a conversation with it. He carries the stillness of a man who has already seen the finished work in his mind's eye. When his hammer hits, it is not a desperate plea for progress, but a gentle confirmation of an existing fact. The paradox is clear. Both men are performing the same physical labor, yet the quality of their movement is worlds apart. One is making a process defined by resistance and the exhausting friction of the ego. The other is creating a process defined by flow and the effortless expression of a settled inner reality. One is trying to reach the future, the other is expressing the present. Which of these men do you imagine will see his masterpiece stand the test of time? To understand the mechanics of inspired action, we must dismantle the most persistent myth in the philosophy of success, that exertion is the primary driver of result. We are taught that hard work is a virtue, and while labor is indeed a component of life, we confuse the quality of the labor with the necessity of the struggle. Let us apply recursive thinking. Why does the human mind default to struggle as a metric for worthiness? Because we have been conditioned to believe that the world is a closed, competitive system where resources are finite. We believe that to get what we want, we must overcome external resistance. Therefore, our actions become defensive, urgent, and strain-filled. This is the action of lack. How, then, does inspired action differ from striving action? It is a matter of causality. Striving action flows toward a result, attempting to bridge the gap between have-not and have. Inspired action flows from the state of already having. When you have fully inhabited the inner state of your fulfillment, your subconscious mind is no longer operating from a position of deficit. Your nervous system is no longer flooded with the cortisol of, if I don't do this, I will lose. Why is this distinction so critical? Because the world reads the energy of your movement. When you act out of lack, you signal to the mirror of reality that you are a person who is currently deprived. The world, being a faithful reflector, confirms this by offering you more evidence of deprivation. When you act from the state of fulfillment, your actions are confident, unforced, and purposeful. You are not doing to get, you are doing to express. How do we refine this into a mechanism? By understanding that inspired action is not the absence of work, it is the alignment of work. It is the ability to take the necessary, practical steps. For the world is a physical plane and requires physical movement while maintaining the inner orientation of the finished result. It is the archer who does not worry about the wind, but who has already felt the arrow pierce the bullseye in the stillness of his mind. When you align your practical movement with your inner assumption, you are no longer making, you are allowing. You are becoming the vehicle through which your desired reality expresses itself into the physical world. In the age of wooden ships and iron wills, a navigator named Captain Elara was tasked with traversing the great uncharted Reacher Sea, notorious for its deceptive currents and shifting fog. While her crew trembled at the maps, which were filled with sketches of sea monsters and warnings of dead zones, Elara spent her nights in her cabin, studying the stars and the feel of the ship beneath her feet. Her crew, driven by the fear of being lost, spent their days frantically adjusting the sails, shouting orders that contradicted one another, and scrubbing the deck with a religious, desperate zeal. They believed that if they kept the ship in constant, violent motion, they would somehow outrun the tragedy that awaited them. Elara walked among them, silent and serene. She would occasionally touch the wheel, nudging it only a few degrees to the left or the right. She never shouted. She never looked at the maps with dread. She moved with the calm of a captain who had already stood on the docks of the far shore. One night, as the fog grew so thick the men could not see their own hands, the crew panicked. "We are adrift," they cried. "We are lost. We must row. We must steer. We must do something." Elara stepped onto the quarterdeck and placed her hand on the wheel. She did not struggle with the ship. She did not fight the currents. She simply held the course she had long ago committed to memory, the course of arrival. She felt the ship's vibration, listened to the rhythm of the waves, and made small, deliberate adjustments. She was not trying to find the shore. She was navigating from the shore she already inhabited in her mind. The crew was exhausted, depleted by their frantic struggle against the sea. But Elara, through her inspired, unforced stewardship, brought the ship through the fog as if she were walking through her own garden. When the fog lifted, the port was exactly where she had felt it to be. She did not create the shore. She allowed the ship to express the destination she had already claimed. The lesson is this: you have been rowing against the tide of your own doubt, exhausting yourself in a frantic display of hustle that serves only to signal to the universe that you are empty. You are running toward a future that you fear you will never reach. And in your terror, you are blocking the very path you wish to walk. To embody this today, you must perform the practice of the pivot. When you feel the familiar impulse to act from urgency, when the heart races, the palms sweat, and the mind spins with the what-if stop, do not take the step. Pivot. Remind yourself, I am not acting to gain, I am acting to express. Take a deep, deliberate breath and bring your awareness back to the inner feeling of your wish fulfilled. From that place of peace, ask, what is the most natural, logical, and unforced step I would take if I were already the person who had this result? Then, and only then, perform that step. You will find that your actions are no longer heavy. They will be infused with a clarity and a magnetism that the world cannot resist. You have learned to stand at the threshold, to build in the invisible, to view the mirror with neutrality, to work in the workshop, and to anchor yourself in the feeling of fulfillment. You have learned that the action of the Creator is the natural outflow of their being. But there is one final, crucial domain we must address. We have discussed your power, and we have discussed your actions. Now, we must speak of the nights, the soft, vulnerable threshold of sleep, where the conscious mind lays down its sword, and the deeper, creative intelligence of the universe is finally allowed to work on your behalf. In our next chapter, we will explore the nighttime planting, the art of entering the dream state with the seed of your creation firmly held in your hand. It is here, in the silence of the subconscious, that the final barriers to your manifestation will dissolve. Subscribe to continue this mastery. The ship is moving, the harbor is waiting, and you are finally learning to sail with the wind rather than against it. See you in the stillness of the night. The world descends into a hushed, velvet twilight. The frantic cacophony of the day, the emails, the obligations, the sharp edges of external circumstances begins to soften, blurring at the margins like an ink drawing caught in a gentle rain. You are approaching the final, most sacred threshold of your daily existence, the descent into sleep. It is a moment most treat with indifference, a mere cessation of effort, a blank gap in the narrative of their lives. Yet, look closer. As the conscious mind, the diligent, analytical gatekeeper begins to loosen its iron grip, the gates to your deeper intelligence swing wide. You are standing at the edge of a vast, primordial ocean of consciousness. This is not merely a rest for the weary. It is the most fertile, high-stakes garden in the universe. What you carry into this darkness, you plant. And what you plant in the fertile loam of the subconscious during these final, drowsy moments of awareness, the universe begins to grow with relentless, mathematical precision. You are currently wasting this transition, tossing your worries, your anxieties, and your fears into the soil like bitter weeds, and then you wake up in the morning wondering why your life is choked with the very things you were thinking about as you drifted off. The paradox is this: the time you consider the most useless, the state between waking and dreaming, is the exact moment where the most powerful creation occurs. To grasp the mechanics of the nighttime plant, we must engage in a rigorous exploration of the architecture of the mind. Why is the state preceding sleep the absolute fulcrum of manifestation? Because in the waking hours, the conscious mind acts as a critical filter. It is riddled with skepticism, past conditioning, and an obsession with physical evidence. It constantly rejects new information if it contradicts the current reality. However, as you move toward the threshold of sleep, the gatekeeper falls silent. The logical, doubting mind drifts into the background, leaving the subconscious. This is the theta state, the realm of pure receptivity. Let us apply recursive thinking. How does the subconscious treat the impressions it receives at this hour? It does not argue. It does not judge. It does not look at your bank account, your failed relationships, or your stagnant career and say, "This is impossible." It simply accepts the last, most vivid impression it is given as the absolute, objective truth of your existence, and it begins to reorganize the entirety of your life to reflect that truth. Why do most people fail to utilize this? Because they allow the debris of the day to dictate the seed. They fall asleep reviewing the arguments they had, the money they lack, or the loneliness they feel. How then do we master this? We must understand that the subconscious is an architect that works strictly from the final design it is handed before the lights go out. To master your life, you must become the deliberate gardener of your sleep. You must curate the scene, the sensory, vivid experience of your wish already fulfilled, and hold it with such gentle, unwavering persistence that it becomes the final frequency you broadcast before the transition. You are not hoping for a result. You are handing the blueprint to the master builder who works through the night to rearrange your world into the image of that blueprint. In a mountain province of the ancient East, there lived a recluse known only as the night gardener. He lived in a humble hut at the edge of a barren, stony cliff, yet his garden was the envy of every king. While the surrounding lands were desolate, his garden bloomed with impossible flora, flowers that hummed with color in the moonlight, fruits that tasted of honey and earth, and trees that stood firm against the strongest gales. The king, sensing some dark or divine magic, sent his finest agriculturalists to observe him. They hid in the bushes, expecting to see him working through the night with forbidden potions or complex irrigation systems. But they watched in astonishment as the gardener did nothing of the sort. He spent his days in quiet, unremarkable labor, simply preparing the soil. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, he would retire to his hut. The spies broke into his hut one evening, thinking to steal his secrets. They found him sitting in a simple wooden chair, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and rhythmic. He was not reciting spells. He was not performing rituals. He was simply holding a single, vivid thought in his mind, the feeling of the flowers in full bloom, the smell of the damp, rich earth, and the sound of the wind through the leaves. He sat there until he felt the transition into sleep, and in that moment, he breathed the essence of that bloom into the quiet dark. The king's men returned, confused. They had seen nothing but a man sleeping. They reported that he had no secrets, no machinery, no hidden tools. But the king, a man of deeper wisdom, understood. The gardener was not waiting for the world to grow his garden. He was planting the reality of the garden into the silence of the night. He knew that the seed did not need sunlight to germinate. It needed the absolute, uninterrupted belief of the gardener. The stone cliff did not resist him, because he had already dissolved the stone in the workshop of his own consciousness. His world grew in the dark, and by dawn, the garden was simply expressing what had already been settled within. The lesson is absolute. You have been leaving your reality to chance, falling asleep as a victim of your daily circumstances rather than the master of your destiny. You have been allowing the world to plant its weeds in your soil, and then you have been surprised by the harvest. To embody this today, you must commit to the practice of the nocturnal seed. Tonight, as you approach the threshold of sleep, do not review the events of the day. Do not rehearse your worries. Instead, identify one scene, one short, sensory-rich fragment that implies the fulfillment of your desire. If you want a new life, visualize the feeling of the keys in your hand, or the touch of the fabric of your new success, or the sound of a voice congratulating you on the goal achieved. Repeat this scene, not as a movie you are watching, but as a place you are inhabiting. Let it grow vivid. Feel it until it feels real, until it feels ordinary, until it feels like the truth. As you feel the drift towards sleep, do not let go of the feeling. Let the scene be the final vessel you step into as you leave the shore of the waking world. Do not worry about how the intelligence of the universe will manifest this. You have given it the design. Your only job is to plant the seed. But be warned, the seed is vulnerable. If you wake up in the morning and immediately check the mirror of your life for evidence, you are digging up the seed to see if it has sprouted. This is the only way you can sabotage the process. In our next chapter, we will explore the social web, how your new inner state changes not just your circumstances, but the very behavior of the people around you. You will discover how your assumption about the goodness and capacity of others is a creative act that calls forth the best from them, rendering your world a place of harmonious support. Your hand is on the frame. The night is approaching. Like this video, if you are ready to stop being the victim of your own subconscious and start being the architect of your destiny, the bridge is closing. Sleep well, for you are finally learning how to wake up to a world of your own design. Imagine you are standing on a grand stage, the velvet curtains heavy and silent, waiting to be drawn back. You are not alone. The stage is filled with a cast of hundreds, colleagues, rivals, lovers, strangers, and friends. They are all frozen in place, their expressions ambiguous, their postures neutral, like actors awaiting a director's final instruction. You, the sole observer, possess a script that no one else can see. In this script, you have assigned every single person a role. The difficult boss, the unfaithful partner, the generous benefactor, the hostile competitor. As you step into the light, the curtains rise, and the play begins. You are astonished to find that every person on stage performs their role with such terrifying, meticulous accuracy that you are convinced they are acting of their own free will. The difficult boss scowls, The generous benefactor offers an unexpected hand, and the hostile competitor throws a roadblock in your path. You feel like a victim of their choices, a passenger in a production you did not write. Yet, here is the paradox that burns. If you were to change the script in your hand, if you were to rewrite the character descriptions before the next act, the actors would, with no memory of the previous performance, begin to play the new parts with the same uncanny, lifelike conviction. You are not a bystander in the social web. You are the playwright, the director, and the stage manager. Every interaction you experience is a line of dialogue you have written in the hidden chambers of your assumptions. The tragedy of human life is that we treat the cast as if they are the masters of the play, forgetting that they are only appearing in the costumes we have stitched for them in our minds. To master the social web, we must confront the uncomfortable truth of human agency and the law of correspondence. Why do we feel that other people operate with an autonomy that defies our influence? Because we are deeply attached to the illusion of the other. We perceive people as solid, immutable entities, separate from our own consciousness. Let us apply recursive thinking. Why does the world appear to be populated by difficult or supportive people? Because your consciousness is a magnet that filters the totality of human behavior. Every human being is a complex, multi-dimensional creature. They contain within them the potential for kindness and cruelty, brilliance and mediocrity, generosity and greed. When you interact with someone, you are not engaging with their entire being. You are engaging with the version of them that your subconscious assumption invites to the surface. How does this occur? It happens through the frequency of your expectations. If you approach a person with the assumption that they will betray you, you unconsciously broadcast a frequency of suspicion. They, in turn, respond to that energy. They may not know why, but they will find themselves feeling defensive or cold in your presence, and they will act in a way that confirms your belief. You have dressed them in the role of the betrayer, and they have performed it to perfection. Why is this not a violation of free will? It is not that you are controlling them through manipulation. You are calling forth a specific aspect of their multifaceted nature. You are acting as a mirror. If you hold an assumption of a person's goodness, you provide them with the emotional safety to be their best self. You elevate them. You are not a manipulator. You are a catalyst. How do we take responsibility for this? By realizing that every person in your world is a reflection of your relationship with yourself. If you assume you are worthy of love, you will find that even the most difficult people begin to treat you with an unexpected, inexplicable respect. The web is not something you are trapped in. It is a resonance that you are actively composing. In the fractured kingdoms of the Silk Road, there was an emissary named Kalen, tasked with negotiating peace between two warring factions. The terrain was held by groups of lawless brigands who were known to strip travelers of their clothes and leave them for the vultures. Kalen's advisors begged him to take an army of 1,000 men, warning him that the brigands were born of blood and hunger. Kalen refused the army. He took only a small caravan, and, most surprisingly, he carried no weapons. Before he even entered the territory, he spent his nights in the workshop of imagination. He did not imagine the brigands as monsters. He sat in the silence and inhabited the feeling of being in the presence of noble, intelligent men who were merely waiting for someone to recognize their worth. He assumed that they were capable of diplomacy, of honor, and of profound hospitality. He lived in the assumption that he was entering a region of brothers. As he rode into the heart of the brigands' domain, his scouts were terrified, expecting an ambush at every turn. When they encountered the first group of raiders, the brigands leveled their spears at Kalen's chest. The soldiers froze, expecting death. Kalen did not flinch. He looked at the leader not as a brigand, but as a man of wisdom and power. He smiled, not with arrogance, but with the genuine recognition of a peer. He spoke to them as if they were the honorable governors of the region. He treated them as if their word was law, and their kindness was legendary. The brigands were stunned. The leader lowered his spear, his brow furrowing in confusion. He had lived his life being treated as a savage, and he had performed that role with brutal efficiency. But Kalen's assumption was so heavy, so real, and so unshakable that the leader found he could not maintain the role of the brigand. He felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to prove Kalen right. He invited Kalen to his fire, offered him bread and wine, and ended up becoming his greatest protector. Kalen didn't conquer the brigands. He gave them a better version of themselves, and they gladly walked into it. The lesson is a profound shift in power. You have been holding the people in your life in the roles of your past grievances. You are effectively shackling them to their old patterns by refusing to see anything else in them. To embody this today, you must perform the practice of the elevated assumption. Identify one person in your life, a difficult colleague, a distant relative, a frustrating acquaintance who consistently disappoints you. Now, take a moment of silence and strip away your history with them. Do not look at their past behavior. That is the ghost of a performance that is already over. Instead, write a new script. Assume that they are, at their core, capable of kindness, intelligence, and cooperation. Feel what it would feel like to encounter a version of them that is fully aligned with your success. Carry this assumption into your next interaction. When you meet them, speak to the higher version of them. Watch how they pause, how they shift, and how they begin to reflect the very energy you have projected. You are not manipulating. You are liberating them to be someone better. But what of the skeptic within? That part of your mind that argues, can it truly be this simple? If I have this much power, why am I living in a world that often feels so hostile? You are approaching the final, most demanding stage of this transformation, the responsibility of absolute ownership. You are nearing the end of the threshold, but the final hurdle is the temptation to return to the comfort of the victim's chair. In our next chapter, we will discuss the burden of liberty. We will explore why most people choose to stay in their prison of circumstances rather than accept the terrifying, exquisite freedom of being the total architect of their experience. The door is standing wide open. Subscribe to this mission, for the final transition requires you to shed the skin of your former self once and for all. The social web is waiting to be rewritten. Are you the playwright, or are you just a character in someone else's drama? The answer is coming. You find yourself standing at the absolute center of a vast, circular room, the walls of which are paneled in dark, polished mahogany. In the very middle of the floor lies a simple, iron-bound chest. For as long as you can remember, you have been told that this chest is locked, that it contains the secrets of your destiny, the map to your prosperity, and the keys to your freedom. But that the key was lost to time, stolen by the cruel whims of fate, or perhaps never existed at all. You have spent your years circling this chest, cursing its cold, unyielding surface, and blaming the walls, the architecture, and the architects themselves for the fact that you remain confined within this room. But then a shift occurs, a hairline fracture in the narrative you have clung to with such desperate loyalty. You notice something you have never dared to look at before. There is no lock on the chest. There is no bolt, no seal, no external mechanism of defense. The lid is resting simply upon the base, held closed only by the weight of your own expectation that it should be locked. The paradox is agonizing. You have been living as a prisoner not because the doors were barred or the chest was bolted, but because you found comfort in the identity of the captive. To be a prisoner is to be absolved of the terrifying responsibility of walking out the door. To be a captive is to be permitted the luxury of complaining about the quality of the dungeon. But now you realize the truth. The handle is on the inside, and the door has always been swinging outward. The burden you are about to lift is not a physical weight. It is the weight of your own total, uncompromising, and infinite liberty. Are you prepared to bear the responsibility of a life that is entirely your own creation? To embrace the burden of liberty, one must first engage in a brutal, necessary excavation of the ego. Why is it that the human soul, which cries out for freedom in every poem, song, and philosophy, so consistently recoils from it when it is finally within reach? We must apply the method of recursive thinking to unmask the deepest instinct of the human animal, the instinct for safety over sovereignty. Why do we prefer the familiar misery of our circumstances to the unfamiliar power of our creative potential? because circumstances, however painful, provide a boundary. They provide a narrative. If life happens to you, you are a protagonist in a tragedy, a role that carries a certain tragic nobility. You are excused from the need to change, for the world is the villain, and you are the martyr. How does this protect the ego? It protects it from the possibility of failure. If you are the architect of your reality, and you remain in a place of scarcity or pain, then the blame has nowhere else to land. The ego would rather die in the prison of its own limitations than live in the terror of realizing it was the jailer all along. How, then, do we transcend this? By realizing that responsibility is not a chore, it is an anagram for responsibility, the capacity to respond to reality with the consciousness of a creator. Why is this so difficult? Because it requires the death of the victim self. It requires you to look at every injustice, every setback, every unwelcome guest in your life, and own them as the objectified children of your past assumptions. How do we process this without descending into self-loathing? We recognize that we created them unconsciously. We were children of old patterns, asleep at the wheel, running scripts we inherited from the ghosts of our ancestors. The moment of awakening is the moment you realize that previous creation does not equal permanent destiny. You are not to blame for the past, but you are entirely responsible for the future. You are shifting from being a puppet of the past to being the director of the present. This is the burden of liberty. You no longer have the comfort of an enemy. You have only the reflection of your own choices. It is the most terrifying thing you will ever experience. And it is the only path to the throne of your own existence. In the annals of an empire long turned to dust, there lived an architect named Julian, whose buildings were so magnificent that it was whispered the gods had guided his hand. Yet, Julian lived his life in the shadow of a colossal, crumbling ruin that stood at the edge of his estate. This ruin was the remains of a project his father had attempted, a project that had failed spectacularly, leading to the family's poverty and the father's eventual madness. Julian spent his entire adulthood working in the shadow of these ruins, obsessively trying to fix them, trying to re-erect the fallen pillars, and trying to prove that he could overcome his father's curse. He believed that he was bound by the tragedy of his lineage. He saw himself as the steward of a broken inheritance. He spent his gold on the ruins. He spent his genius trying to patch the holes that were, by their very nature, unpatchable. One evening, after decades of exhaustion, Julian sat among the broken stones and finally wept. He realized that the ruins were not his to fix. They were a monument to a reality that no longer existed. He had been so busy trying to justify his father's failure that he had forgotten he was the greatest architect of his age. He was the owner of the land, the master of the tools, and the possessor of the vision. The ruins were not a curse. They were just rubble. He stood up, walked into the middle of his empty field, and began to draw a new design in the dirt, a design that had nothing to do with the past. He didn't tear down the ruins. He simply stopped feeding them his life force. He turned his back on the monument of his imprisonment and began to build something entirely new. Within a year, his new palace was finished, and the people of the empire flocked to see it, never even noticing the pile of stones rotting in the weeds behind it. Julian had learned the ultimate lesson. You are not the sum of your past creations. You are the source of your next one. The burden you are lifting is the weight of a past that no longer exists. You have been fixing your ruins, trying to mend the relationships, the debts, and the habits of a version of you that is already dead. You are the architect, and the land is empty. It is time to draw a new design. To embody this today, you must perform the covenant of ownership. Sit down with a blank sheet of paper and write down the circumstances of your life that you find most frustrating. Beside each, write, I created this by my previous assumptions. Do not write this to shame yourself. Write it to reclaim your power. If you created it, you have the absolute authority to uncreate it. Once you have acknowledged this, burn the paper. Let the fire represent the finality of that reality. You are no longer the steward of your ruins. You are the architect of the palace. You have accepted the burden of liberty. You have faced the death of the victim. You have seen that there are no locks, only weights. But what happens now? What happens when you realize that the kingdom you are building is not just for you, but for the world? The final stage of this journey is the synthesis, the point where your inner world and outer reality become so aligned that you are no longer a manifester, but a presence in the world. In our final chapter, we will distill everything we have uncovered into a 30-day mandate. We will prepare for the ultimate test of your consistency and faith. You have come this far, and the threshold is no longer in front of you, it is beneath you. Like this video, if you are finally ready to walk away from your ruins and step into the palace of your own making. The bridge is behind us. There is only the work, the vision, and the freedom. Prepare yourself for the final unveiling. You stand now upon the final precipice. Below you, the fog of the past, the half-remembered failures, the phantom pains of what if, and the dusty blueprints of lives you once thought you were meant to lead, has entirely dissipated. The landscape ahead is not a map someone else has drawn. It is a pristine, sun-drenched expanse of potentiality, stretching out toward an infinite horizon. The air here is sharp, exhilarating, and clear. You look down at your own hands. They are the same hands that trembled when they touched the threshold in the beginning, the same hands that gripped the tools of making and doing with such desperate, misdirected force. But they are no longer shaking. They are steady. They are the hands of a master architect who has finally accepted that the tools of creation are not made of iron or gold, but of consciousness, commitment, and the quiet, immovable certainty of the end. The paradox that now greets you is the ultimate realization. You did not come to this place to get something. You did not climb this mountain to find a treasure hidden at the peak. You came here to realize that the peak was never a location, but a frequency. You have walked through the threshold, you have dismantled the mirror, you have mastered the workshop, and you have owned the burden of your liberty. You are not arriving at a destination. You are finally standing in the only place you have ever truly inhabited, the eternal, creative present. The stage is set. The final act of your transformation is not something that happens to you. It is the reality you are now authorized to command. To master the 30-day synthesis, we must perform a final, rigorous deconstruction of the manifestation process itself. Why does the seeker so often fail, even after understanding the principles? We apply recursive thinking. Why does the mind, when faced with the infinite possibility of the already, reflexively retreat toward the finite constraints of the not yet? It is because the human brain is a creature of habit. It finds comfort in the slow, incremental climb of effort. The concept of living from the end is an insult to the ego's desire to earn its reward. How, then, do we sustain this state for 30 days? We must recognize that the primary obstacle is not the how or the when, but the monitoring. The moment you begin to check the mirror for evidence of your success, you have fundamentally broken the law of correspondence. You are signaling to the universe that you are still the person who is waiting, not the person who is being. Why is 30 days the cycle of transformation? It is not a magical number, but a psychological crucible. It is the duration required to replace the neural architecture of lack with the steady-state frequency of fulfillment. How do you navigate this cycle without faltering? You must adopt the protocol of the irreversible. In this protocol, you choose a single, specific desire, a seed of such potency that it acts as the anchor for your new reality. You treat this desire not as a goal to be pursued, but as a condition that is already true. When the inevitable wave of doubt arrives, and it will arrive on the third or fourth day, like a tide testing the integrity of a seawall, you do not fight it. You treat it with the mild, detached amusement of a spectator watching a distant storm. You return with the gentle, rhythmic persistence of a master to the scene that implies fulfillment. You do not worry about the circumstances, for you know they are merely the after effects of your consciousness. The 30-day synthesis is not a period of waiting, it is a period of inhabitation. It is the intentional maintenance of a frequency until the physical world, bowing to the inevitability of the law, assumes the shape you have sculpted for it. In a coastal kingdom of the ancient world, there was a king whose power was not measured by his armies, but by his mastery of the tides. His kingdom sat upon a treacherous bay where the water would rise with such violence that it threatened to swallow the capital city every 20 years. The people lived in a state of perpetual terror, building higher walls and deeper moats, always watching the horizon with bated breath, waiting for the surge. The king, however, was different. He spent his days in the highest tower, his eyes closed, his breathing attuned to the cosmic pulse of the sea. He did not build walls, he did not dig moats, he simply sat in the state of the bay, at peace. He felt the water as it would be when it was calm. He heard the gentle lapping of the waves against the stone, and he maintained this feeling with the unshakable certainty of a man who held the ocean in his own heart. His generals begged him to fortify the city, to prepare for the inevitable disaster. They called him a fool, a madman, a king who had lost his touch with reality, but he ignored their panic. He remained in his tower, consistent, immovable, and at peace. On the day the tide was scheduled to surge, the sky turned black, the wind shrieked, and the sea began to churn with a terrifying, mountainous fury. The people huddled in their homes, bracing for the end. But in the tower the king did not move. He did not open his eyes. He only deepened the feeling of the calm, until the bay was not a threat in his mind, but an extension of his own tranquility. The waves reached the harbor wall, towering over the city, and then, with a sound like a great, subsiding breath, they stopped. They flattened. The water retreated, tamed by a force the people could not understand. They looked up at the tower, realizing then that the sea had not retreated because of the king's command, but because the king had become the calm. He had synthesized the inner state of safety so completely that the ocean, which is merely a mirror of the world's hidden rhythms, had no option but to mirror that safety back to him. The king did not change the tide. He changed the consciousness that the tide inhabited. You are now the master of your own bay. You have learned that the storms of your life, the financial pressures, the social conflicts, the stubborn circumstances, are only tidal surges reacting to the frequency you have been holding in your tower. You no longer need to build walls of effort. You no longer need to dig moats of desperation. You only need to maintain the frequency of your fulfillment. To synthesize this truth, commit to the following 3 0-day mandate. Choose one reality, just one. For the next 30 days, night and morning, enter your workshop. Feel the feeling of that reality as an accomplished fact. When you move through your day, wear this state like a garment. Do not announce it, do not prove it, just be it. When the doubt comes, and it will, do not try to argue with it. Simply observe it, smile, and return to the feeling of the end. You are not waiting for the evidence. You are the evidence. As the days turn into weeks, you will notice the subtle shifts. The quality of your sleep will deepen. The way you wake will feel different. The people around you will begin to treat you with an unexpected, magnetic respect. The circumstances will begin to rearrange themselves, often from directions you could not have possibly anticipated. Do not rush to claim them as a victory. Simply acknowledge them as the natural, expected reflection of the state you have been inhabiting. You have reached the end of this current transmission, but you have reached the beginning of your true life. The threshold you once stared at is now behind you, and the kingdom you have authored is waiting for you to walk into it. You are a creator. You are an architect. You are the source. The work now belongs to you. Go forth, command your consciousness, and let the world bow to the majesty of your internal reality. The door is wide open, step through.